Welcome again to Conversations. My name is Professor Chris Chambers at Georgetown University. Conversations is a production, of the International Conflict Resolution Center in conjunction with the Caspian Policy Center, nonprofit, independent NGOs and think tanks based here in the nation's capital, Washington, D.C. Our guest today is the esteemed General Ben Hodges, coming to us from Frankfurt, Germany. General Hodges is a native of Florida, graduate of the United States Military Academy at West Point. And I'm wondering, did you see The Pale Blue Eye, that movie about Edgar Allan Poe at West Point yet?
No, I have never seen that movie, but now I've got to go find it.
Yeah, it was a novel by one of my friends at Princeton, Louis Bayard, and it's about Edgar Allan Poe and an investigator solving murders at West Point in 1830, when the future of the academy was still kind of in doubt in Washington. Very good movie. They filmed it actually in Pittsburgh rather than the Hudson Highlands, and so it looked like the Hudson River to me. So I guess they did a good job. General Hodges is currently Senior Advisor to Human Rights First in Frankfurt. He was Pershing Chair at the in Strategic Studies at the Center for European Policy Analysis, or CEPA, here in Washington. He is the author or co-author of Future War and the Defense of Europe, published by Oxford University Press. He was commander of NATO Allied Land Command, Allied Land Command from 2012, 2014, and 2014 and 2017. He was in command of U.S. Army forces in Europe. General Hodges, thank you for being with us today and taking time out to talk to us about what's going on over there. Before I get into the first question, I think the new German defense minister is supposed to be talking to Lloyd Austin this week. What are your thoughts on that, just really quick?
Well, of course, and thanks, Professor, for the privilege to be on your podcast again. Of course, this week is the recurring monthly Ramstein Contact Group, which is 50 different nations where the defense ministers come together and talk about requirements for Ukraine and who's going to provide what and that sort of thing. So it's become a very good disciplined process. Not surprising, given that Lord Austin is running this thing. I think this particular Ramstein Contact Group is more important, or maybe there'll be more attention on it than usual, because number one, this is happening in the immediate aftermath of this terrible rocket attack that killed 40 innocent Ukrainians here just this past weekend, a precision weapon that slammed into an apartment building. So what comes out of this particular Ramstein Contact Group, I think, could be seen by many as the West's response. And that, I think that'll be significant. But also, exactly as you highlight, today, Germany announced their new defense minister, Boris Pistorius, and he is. It was a little bit of a surprise. Actually, he was not in the list of 4 or 5 names that everybody was talking about as a likely guy, but he did serve as a conscript in the early days, like almost every German male did of his generation, and he's from the same party as the chancellor, of course, as you know, and your listeners know. Germany has coalition government, and so in the coalition, the cabinet positions are part of the coalition agreement. Who gets what? And so it was almost for certain going to be coming out of the SPD anyway. So this will be a good opportunity for the new minister to show who he is, establish a personal relationship with the American Secretary of Defense as well as other defense ministers, and hopefully help Germany lead more than they have done in the past.
Well, I'm glad you brought up when you said precision weapon aimed at an apartment complex. When I've been overseas, I've seen some of their not very precision weapons, Russian weapons, rockets in particular, fall on a lot of houses, farms, etc., everywhere from Azerbaijan to Georgia. And the excuse has been, well, they're not very accurate weapons. I mean, here, this was, clearly something that was purposeful and targeted. You're not an international lawyer, but you have certainly studied international law. I mean, is this a war crime in your estimation?
Well, absolutely, it's a war crime, but I would also say it's a war crime to use a weapon that kills innocent people, knowing that it was not an accurate weapon. I mean, the burden is
Right.
on the combatant to protect innocent people, and the fact that what you were talking about that happened in the past was, well, it was a dumb bomb or it was something that's not accurate, then you shouldn't have employed it. That was the burden on us, American forces, and we were not without mistakes, obviously. But if you had a whole series of things you would have to go through before you could use a certain type of weapon, trying to limit or minimize the number of casualties. In this case, we're talking about a multi-million-dollar precision weapon that was launched from a bomber, and this is just the latest in the hundreds of targeted strikes against civilian residential areas, civilian infrastructure that is not related to military capability. So absolutely, these are all war crimes.
Well, let me get straight into the more general questions, and then we can dig a little deeper. I last spoke to you about a year ago, and just here's the obvious questions. I mean, what predictions or analyses have been borne out in a year? What do you think you got wrong, and what were the surprises? I'll just leave it open to you.
Yeah, well, thank you. Thanks for reminding me how wrong I was on my assessment of Russian capability. I really thought they would do better. I never subscribed to the 3 days or, I mean, that mathematically was not possible. You couldn't drive there and encircle Kyiv in 3 days with tanks, even if there was no Ukrainian troops. I mean, it wasn't feasible. But I certainly did not anticipate the poor performance in those early months of Russian Federation forces. And I've asked myself, I've tried to figure out, how did I get it so wrong after watching for years, both from NATO Allied Land Command and then from U.S. Army Europe, where of course we were watching this. And what I failed to appreciate is the depth of corruption inside the ministry and inside the military, and the impact of all that corruption. That is something that I missed. And then I had assumed that they had a lot more operational experience than they actually did. But in fact, the vast majority of Russian forces had never been outside of Russia. And so it was usually a small percentage that was doing most of their work in Georgia and Syria and Africa and Crimea and Donbass. And so they were not experienced, to be honest. And then, of course, if you don't have experience, you have to make up for it with really tough, demanding exercises. And that was the third thing that I missed. They absolutely do not have a culture of train to the point of failure, do an after action review, then go back and do it again, get it right. I mean, they just don't do that. So as I've looked at it, I think those were some of the reasons why I got it so wrong. On the other hand, I was always sure Ukrainian forces would do well. We have been working with them since 2015. They had a lot of problems, but you could tell that there was a sort of a tenacity there and a toughness. And also, I don't think there are any soldiers on the planet that can learn and adapt to new technology faster than Ukrainians. It's been incredible. And we talk about how they MacGyver things now. I mean, they're able to do stuff that just is not textbook, let's say. What I did not anticipate, and this would be the last thing, what I did not anticipate is how well the Ukrainian population and Ukrainian elected officials have come together and their resilience. I did not anticipate that.
Thank you for that. You mentioned MacGyver. I just wanted to listen our listeners. The general's referring to an old American TV show where the protagonist would basically take paper clips and gum and build a bomber out of it.
He could solve every problem with whatever was within reach. It was incredible.
Yes, and that's what they're doing. I mean, it's do you think that you underestimated and this is a difficult question I'm about to ask you. Do you think that you were a little too hyper technical in underestimating their kind of mental and cultural resolve? I mean, because you're a soldier, and you're a technician. I mean, and you do allow for spirit and that kind of fighting resolve, but sometimes that does get pushed back a little bit. I mean, do you think you underestimated that in their forces and in their population?
Not in their forces, but at the upper levels in ministries and in the Rada, the parliament, and in society, I had not seen what I see now. They had, like most democratic countries, they had significant political infighting, debates. There was, you still had certain oligarchs that had an awful lot of authority or scoffed at authority, were doing their own thing. And so, the defense industry conglomerate at the time in Ukraine was not producing what it should have or could have. And so I think there was some frustration at different levels with the level of corruption and so on inside Ukraine. But then, of course, it's useful to remember this is a brand new democracy. I mean, they've been a democracy for basically 30 years. If you start the clock from the end of the Soviet Union when they become independent, that doesn't make them democratic, but that gives you, in terms of time, we've been at it for about 250 years, and we don't quite have it right yet. So in fact, let me tell you this. I went with a small delegation of, I guess you'd call it a track 1.5 delegation to Kyiv in early February, before the Russian special military operation started. And our purpose was to go there and encourage Ukrainian political leaders and civilian leaders to work together as the Russians were circling around. And so I guess that's what caused me to think like that.
Well, it does it give you, and we'll talk about this when we talk about, third parties in the region, Caspian and Black Sea, but does it give you hope that they were able to accomplish this without some kind of, major purges and, mass arrests and hysteria? It seems, at least on the surface, that they were able to accomplish this kind of coalescing of will without going out and literally, you see in some countries, murdering the opposition.
Yeah.
Does that give you hope personally, considering what you do now?
So seeing President Zelensky on like day 2 or 3 there in late February, when he came out onto the street and he had his cell phone, held it up and with his closest advisors and said, "We're still here." And the decision to stay in Kyiv with his family versus leaving, that really got the world's attention. I mean, this was a guy that personal courage, personal example, and obviously a brilliant communicator. That to me has been the most important event of this entire conflict. And it's a reminder of what positive galvanizing leadership can do. That doesn't mean that there's no dissension, that people are not happy or that they're frustrated or whatever, but as I look at Ukraine, and I mean, this is pretty much what I eat and breathe every day now, for the past quite some time. You can see that, of course, there is normal frictions that happen inside a government that's under such huge duress, but you don't get the sense that there are large segments of the parliament, for example, or the society that are being unhelpful. I'll say it like that.
Well, let's go on that track and just hit the other side then, and we'll get the 800-pound American gorilla out of the way. What is your take on the scope and nature of U.S. military and political support? We'll start with military, but let me just elaborate on the political support. In the past and currently, especially with the Republicans now holding the House of Representatives, support for Ukraine and Zelensky specifically has caused a rift in the GOP. With Vladimir Putin having a bizarre level of support among many in the party. On that political end, after we talk about the military aid, do you think that that's a reliable strategy for Putin? I mean, ripe for exploitation, misinformation, both in the United States, and we can take it to other NATO countries as well. And on the other side of that particular political debate, we have a lot of progressive Democrats and activists here who are saying, billions for Ukraine, but what about our schools and housing? So let's take the military. What do you think of the military support? I mean, and you have Ramstein taking place, and then let's go to the political part here. So just take it away, and whatever. In all fairness, say whatever you want, because that's what we're here for, to stir debate.
Of course, there is no military support without political support. I mean, it's the Congress that has to authorize and pay for, the hundreds of millions of dollars of equipment, supplies, all the different things that we're doing. And I think that the very, very strong bipartisan political support has been reassuring, and it's also been essential. Yes, there was a small group of Democrats on the left side of the Democrats that were against this. And obviously there are some well-known Republican names that are out there that have complained about this. But I think we saw from the midterm elections that this was not a political issue. I mean, for most people, this was not something that was going to get traction. And so my sense, even though I live here in Frankfurt, obviously I pay close attention to this. My sense is that the U.S. Is going to continue at the level of support we're doing right now, at least up through the end of this year and hopefully beyond, because I think most thinking people realize that this is not just about Ukraine. This is about American security. This is about American prosperity. Our prosperity is directly tied to European prosperity, which is based on having stability and security in Europe. And it's based on this international rules-based order where people respect sovereign boundaries, they respect international law, they respect human rights. That's what this is about. And frankly, it's also about deterring China. That China, they will be watching to see whether or not we have what it takes to stick with this. I believe we do. Now, I give the United States an A- so far. Probably one of the best diplomatic efforts I've ever seen from our country in my professional life, keeping everybody together. It's been impressive, both by the president as well as his team, Secretary Blinken, Secretary Austin. Where we have fallen short yet, I don't understand it, but we continue to deter ourselves out of an exaggerated risk of Russian escalation to nuclear weapons. And so we've been incrementally providing aid that without the Russians ever really being able to do anything about it. And the fact that we can't bring ourselves to say we want Ukraine to win keeps us from providing things at the speed and certain types of things that I think would make a difference. And of course, everybody else, the other countries, most countries kind of wait to see what we do, with the exception of UK. UK is out front.
Well, this is going to bleed into my next question, but do you think there is some kind of, and I'm reaching here, intelligence, let's say, that Putin will personalize this and say, if I can't, it's basically if I can't win, then nobody's going to win, and I'll just authorize, tactical nukes because I don't care because I'm going down anyway. I mean, do you think that there's intelligence to that effect, or we're just maybe overthinking this, as he's talking about, kind of like self-deterrence? What's your
Yeah.
opinion on that?
So, of course, people in the Pentagon and the White House will have access to intelligence that I don't have. Of course, I know that. But the risk of Russia using nuclear weapons is something I take very seriously. They have thousands of nuclear warheads, tactical and strategic. They clearly don't care how many innocent people will die. But the fact that our president has said that there would be, quote, catastrophic consequences for Russia if they did use a nuclear weapon, I think they believe it. I think the Kremlin believes it. I think the Russian general staff believes it. And so, and I think they know that the catastrophic consequences does not mean a U.S. nuclear weapon, but that it would mean perhaps some sort of use of force that would destroy what's left of their Black Sea Fleet, for example, or a large number of Russian forces in Crimea or elsewhere inside Ukraine. I think they believe that. And it's also important to keep in mind that a tactical nuclear weapon will not give them any battlefield advantage. It won't change anything on the battlefield. So the people around President Putin have got to be thinking, there's going to be life after him. And they would like to have life, hopefully someday get back to something that looks kind of like normal. Even if that means for oligarchs getting back to their apartment in Mayfair or in London, or getting their yacht out of the impound lot, that they're not going to let him do that. And last point, for a tactical nuclear weapon, this is not a big red button in his office. This requires a whole chain of events, and a lot of people have to be involved to do these things necessary. And I think we would see that in progress. And I'm pretty sure that not every single person in that chain would be willing to go through with this.
Yeah, I mean, I was, even when you look at examples like Cuban Missile Crisis, I mean, a lot of the events were pushed not by what was going on in the Kremlin or the White House, but what was going on right there on the ground. With captains and majors and colonels, and even in our military, not one person in an office, and I'm wondering if maybe that point should be made clearer to the American public, because people do get scared about that, and that seems to be one of the talking points about people on the other side, about not pushing this war too much. Let me get to this question then. I mean, with the war resembling, more like Korea in 1950, 1953, complete with attrition, small operations, smaller scale, offensive and counteroffensive, what do you think Ukraine can hope to gain before spring, besides merely just hanging on, or trying to keep the damage from these manned and unmanned attacks from destroying their vital infrastructure, and attacking their population? I mean, what can they do besides hang on? And the second part of that is, once that's done, I mean, is liberating Luhansk and Donetsk even possible, given a war of attrition and their small population, without foreign boots basically lending a hand? What's your view on that?
Okay, we know from history that war is a test of will, and it's a test of logistics. It's obvious that the Ukrainian soldiers have superior will to Russian soldiers. It's obvious that Ukrainian people have superior will to the Russian people. The final test of will is, of course, going to be between Western capitals and the Kremlin. Can the United States, Berlin, London, Paris, the Netherlands, and so on, can we continue to stick together to support Ukraine? I believe we will, but that's an important part of this. The other part, of course, is logistics. The Russian logistics system is under enormous strain. They cannot produce. I mean, they have to import drones from Iran. I mean, they can't replenish a lot of their precision weapons because of sanctions. They're not getting the same sort of revenue from gas anymore because most European countries have moved away from that. And so the Chinese and Indians, of course, are happy to take Russian gas at greatly reduced prices. So there are a lot of factors working against them, and the fact that their military logistics system, is not set up to do that. I would have never thought we'd talk about Russia having manpower problems. They have serious manpower problems. They're offering citizenship to people from anywhere just to come join the military. They are emptying prisons to fill the ranks. Whereas in Ukraine, they have 700,000 people in uniform now, and another 2 million military-age women and men who are prepared to come forward. So that's where we are in terms of the two big things. Now, what's happening now was forecasted, that people thought, okay, wintertime, Russia would pour these mobilized, the unlucky ones who were not clever enough to get out of Russia last September, to buy some time. And of course, with the weather conditions, it was not favorable for maneuver. But here's what I think is happening. Crimea is the decisive terrain. Ukraine has to have Crimea. As long as Russia sits in Crimea, Ukraine will never be safe and secure. They'll never be able to rebuild their economy. So that's the end game. They have to take Crimea. And I believe they can take it by the end of this summer, assuming that the West provides long-range precision weapons that will enable Ukraine to make Crimea untenable for the Russian Navy, Air Force, and Army. At the same time, they're going to continue holding back Russian forces that are up in the Donbass region. That's what we would call economy of force. That's not decisive. A lot of people are dying up there, but there is not going to be a big breakthrough, even if the Russians capture Bakhmut. They have nothing with which to exploit. The third component of this, and then I'll shut up, is the Ukrainians are, I've been so impressed with the general staff. They are building up an armored force that I think within about 3 months will be trained and ready, and they'll have the logistics for it to launch a breakthrough of these long linear trenches of Russian defenses. And the objective, of course, I don't know this, I read a map, would be Mariupol, so that they could sever the so-called land bridge that connects Crimea to Russia. And of course, the other of the two, the other one is the one that goes over the Kerch Bridge. And if that thing has already been damaged, it's still weeks away from being back in service. And so the Ukrainians, I'm sure, will revisit it to make sure that it never is useful as a line of communication as well. So Crimea starts looking like a trap. Actually, that's why I think the Ukrainians can push them out by the end of this summer.
Let me go then to my next question, because we don't have a lot of time to talk about, say, Turkey or Iran. But let's look at third parties here. I mean, you did mention Putin is feeling the pain now from, a lot of European countries are getting their gas from elsewhere. The EU is considering lowering the price caps even more to put the pain on him. We have this massive now thought of massive modernizing and investment interconnectivity in the old Silk Road to basically bypass him. Again, threading the needle past Iran, of course, but we're talking from Central Asia through to the Black Sea. At the same time, however, you have thousands of Russians, as you said, pouring into these countries, and you have a lot of citizens of these countries going still to Russia to look for jobs. Even in Kazakhstan, you have a situation in Georgia where you have a government that's kind of hasn't made up its mind yet whether, even though it's friendly to the West and might want to join NATO. It doesn't want to upset Putin too much, where you have a lot of extremists operating there. I mean, is there a sense that in order to, if he's forced to the peace table, basically, is he going to basically ask, okay, in addition to getting my friends' yachts, as you said, off the impound lot, you have to dismantle all of this new investment in a southern gas route, in the old Silk Road. You have to basically include me in that, or I'm not going to consider peace. I mean, I know it's a complex question, but I just wanted to get your thoughts on that, if you understand my drift.
So, first of all, we have to change how we're thinking about Putin. He is going to be defeated. I mean, the old-fashioned way, they're going to be defeated. He's not going to be in a position, should not be in a position, I ought to say, to demand the kind of things you just talked about. And we should not put pressure on Ukraine to accept anything less than total restoration of all of its sovereign territory, the return of the thousands of Ukrainians who have been deported. And then, of course, international tribunals should already be underway, holding these people accountable. Almost every Russian we've seen on TV is guilty of a war crime of some sort, from President Putin himself on down to including all of his spokesmen, his generals, all of these people. So that's their future. Now, the United States, fortunately, as you well know, it is now the law of the land that we must develop a strategy for the greater Black Sea region, thanks to Senators Shaheen and Romney. That is now the law. And so we're going to stop talking about Ukraine as an island or Turkey as an island, but instead thinking about the region and the east-west economic corridor, the potential, with the Caucasus being the portal between Europe and Eurasia. The problem, I was in Tbilisi last week, and I have to say, it was a little bit discouraging. I did not feel the same spark and excitement there that I had felt in previous years. The party, the Georgia Dream Party, which is the ruling party there, has achieved something close to state capture, and they are absolutely not supportive in any meaningful way of Ukraine. They're dragging their feet on further Western integration. Now, part of that could be our fault, but that we haven't acted consistently enough. And frankly, it's the absence of a strategy. We've had a series of very good ambassadors to include right now, but they haven't had a strategy for the region to which they could hook their efforts. Likewise, our relationship with Turkey, a longtime NATO ally since 1952. And I don't excuse any of the bad decisions made by Ankara, and certainly President Erdogan is no friend of a free press, but they are still our NATO ally. And we have got to think differently about our relationship with Turkey, be more strategic, and figure out how do we make sure that we don't lose this very important ally that sits not just on the Black Sea, but they've got Iran, Iraq, Syria to the south, the Caucasus to the east, the Balkans to the west, and Russia to the north. We have got to do a lot better.
Do you see, on the other hand, the ferment there, or the kind of the situation where Armenia refused to participate in these joint military operations? Do you think there's a cooling there and a further kind of isolation of Russia? That's certainly something that I didn't expect. I thought Georgia would be a little more forceful and Armenia a little more reticent. It seems to be the exact opposite. I mean, do you think that's because Armenia is just in a bad position and just cannot afford to ally themselves with Putin, or is it something else?
I think, of course, you still have 2 Russian bases in Armenia, which is part of the reason why I think Georgia, of course, is looking north and south at Russian troops and why they're anxious. There's also, back in September, when you had the partial mobilization ordered by the Kremlin, about 300,000 Russians headed to or through Georgia to avoid being mobilized. Out of the 500 or so thousand total who left the country, most of them went to or through Georgia. And when I was in Tbilisi, I could hear Russian voices in every restaurant I went to. I mean, they're there. So that affects the mood, I think, a little bit there also. Now, it does seem that more and more of Russia's so-called friends or former friends are less enthusiastic about helping Putin in this war. They're not providing troops. They're not doing much in any material way. So this is why I actually feel optimistic, Professor Chambers, that we may be seeing a real change in what Russia looks like. I'm not advocating for regime change. That never turns out well when we try to bring it about, but we do have to be thinking about the possibility. There will always be a Russian state, but I'm not sure there's always going to be a Russian Federation. And I think a lot of countries or states that make up part of the Federation may be seeing their opportunity.
Well, and I was mentioning Kazakhstan earlier. It seems that there are still a lot of people in some of these countries that do cross the border for work. Apparently, a lot less now, and I mean, that seems to be causing Russia some pain as well. I mean, do you think any of these countries, now I'm talking about Central Asia, are going to start to look east towards China as a partner, as Putin starts to basically degrade his own country? And I'm not saying is that something we need to worry about, but I mean, is that enlightened self-interest for Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan and all those Central Asian countries looking east instead of northwest?
I would expect that the Chinese are certainly thinking along those lines, that they will see opportunity as well as risk. So I think nations are less impressed with Russia's military. They don't feel as cowed anymore. At the same time, interestingly, I'm sure you saw it. There was a very good New York Times piece a couple of days ago or 3 days ago that talked about these long convoys of trucks moving through Georgia into Russia because sanctions and other reasons. People that are doing business with Russia are having to find different ways in, and so you've got massive convoys of trucks that come into Georgia and then cross from Georgia into Russia for all kinds of different things. And the one that got my attention the most, again, this unbelievable, Russia has to import the paper used to make tea bags. So, I mean, that's the kind of stuff that's coming in on these trucks. So I'm not an expert on Central Asia, but what I do see is less and less fealty towards Moscow.
And we're coming down to the end, but I mean, what do you think that this is a way of bringing a country like, say, Georgia around by basically integrating them, not simply looking west, but looking east as a hub for all these materials, not contraband, but materials that are going to, say, Western Europe, and Georgia becoming a Black Sea hub for that? Do you think that might break them, politically at least, Georgia Dream Party, some of their say captive business people might say, hey, it might be better for me to run natural gas and goods through the Black Sea than to run contraband in trucks up to the Russians. What are your thoughts on that?
So back in 2014, on my first visit to Georgia, I met the president there. I was the commander of NATO Allied Land Command, and the president, it was the first president after Saakashvili. And I asked him kind of a stupid tourist question, you know what I mean? I said, Mr. what kind of country is Georgia? How would you describe your country? And it was like he had been waiting all day for that question. He said, we are an East European country that serves as the portal between Europe and Eurasia. And wow, I mean, it completely changed how I thought about the Caucasus and Georgia in particular. But when you can step away from a map and put the Black Sea as kind of in the middle of the map instead of down in the bottom right-hand corner, which is where you usually see it in most European or NATO headquarters, it changes how you think about things. And then you see the potential. And of course, people have tried to act on that. Unfortunately, the Georgia Dream Party has stymied work on a big port project, the Anaclea Port, which would have helped make Georgia a massive logistics hub. And that would have been good for security as well as business, because then you would have had, with German and Dutch and British and American and French companies setting up shop there for this big logistics hub, their parliaments or the Bundestag or the Congress would have also paid more attention to like what's going on there. And of course, that's the last thing that the Kremlin wants. So this project has not gotten off the ground, and it's unfortunate, but it's a reflection. We have not competed effectively there because we haven't had a strategic view of the region.
General, thank you for all of this. We're coming to the end of our talk, and thank you for ending on that, because that's where we need to do the work. I'm hopeful that we can talk again, maybe not in another year, but we'll see how things shape up by summertime, and whether the optimism, at least on the military side and the political side, at least here, bears out. You've been, if you were a bookie, you'd probably be doing okay right now in terms of your predictions. And I do advise you to try to see The Pale Blue Eye. Any West Point person probably should check that out. It's a good movie.
I'm going to look for it right after we finish here.
Sure, yeah, it is. They actually had people from West Point checking on the accuracy of the uniforms and everything about circa 1830. So interesting, and because I didn't know Edgar Allan Poe was a cadet either until I read this, and apparently he was not a very good cadet.
He had a fairly short-lived tenure there.
Yeah, he was, but it was interesting. He was going off post all the time, and they did reflect that in the movie, and that's one of the reasons why he was expelled. It wasn't because he was weird; that was part of it. He would just leave and go hang out in local taverns, which is an interesting way to go about going to school. But thank you so much for joining us. Again, this has been Conversations, a joint production of International Conflict Resolution Center and the Caspian Policy Center. Thank you again to our listeners, and goodbye.